So I want to show you guys something. I was a little sad that Kyle couldn't be with us, so I actually drew a picture of him on my whiteboard based on what he looked like the last time I saw him on a call. So in a way, he's kind of with us.
Uh,
I don't remember him having that hair, but
Oh
okay.
no, his hair was crazy. All right, so we said that this time around we were going to look at the one of the volatility plugins specifically for Twitter. So let me quick get my screen share going. You guys all have the link? I pasted it into the room.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. But I will still do this screen share. Share that. Okay, so I'm now presenting. You guys can all see this, right? Good. Okay. And we wanted to look at Twitter Pie, which is just fun to say.
it is fun to say.
Twitter Pie.
It was fun to write as well. It was a definite learning experience.
So this should be a little more, I don't know, like a little more fun maybe than last time was because, yeah, because we've got one of the actual writers here. So, you know, if nothing else, you can kind of help us to figure out what the heck is this doing when we're at a loss. Because last time we kind of bit off more than we could chew.
Yeah, hopefully I remember something about it because you can see the last dates on this thing.
It's been a while.
Oh, yeah, July 26th of, oh man, it's been almost 2 years since we did anything with this, huh?
Yeah, exactly. So this was for the Volatility plugin contest that they held that year, and you can see the date, the last commit, July 26th. It was due August 1st. was the official end date for that. So I finished it up just in time, submitted, and these actually came in third place in the contest. So I was pretty happy about that.
All right.
Nice little check, little beer money along the way. So that's a good thing. So yeah, there were two plugins, one for Twitter, one for Facebook. Both these things, just in terms of the purpose, all they're really trying to do is scrape through memory and pull out artifacts that we can recognize as being, in this case, from Twitter, or the other one, you know, from Facebook. And what that really boils down to is just kind of regexing your way through blocks of memory to try to find known class structures for what tweets look like. And then maybe the most interesting thing they do along the line, which we'll get to talk about, is try to figure out who the owner is of these. Like if you're on Twitter and you see a tweet, you're given the option to delete. If you don't own that tweet, you're not given the option. So later on, we have the opportunity to try to figure out who actually owned, who was the Twitter user that belonged to this block of memory that we're looking at. So that's the general idea here. I do remember that.
Well, let's take a look at the imports on this, because I was wondering if you could, since you're obviously going to be more familiar with volatility than me, looking at 26 through 30, could you just maybe kind of, I mean, okay, volatility.time format, that's probably pretty obvious what that does, but what do those different imports do?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to I'm doing this as I think is our custom cold, so I'll have to kind of remember off the top of my head what some of these things are. I'm not even sure that I use the volatility object, to be honest with you. I'm a little lazy when it comes to my imports. I think I took a default volatility plugin and just started there and added as I needed, and I'm not known for subtracting as I don't need. So I may not actually use the volatility obj as obj. But in some cases, what you're doing here is importing things just so you can get at, if I remember correctly, other aspects of the data, like proc unique, process ID, that type of thing. So volatility is an awesome set of Python programs, but it's very, very, very complex. One of the challenges for me here was to figure out, just by kind of reverse engineering other plugins, what could I do with volatility? Like what features were available to me, and how do you interact with the framework, and how do you write a plugin? First, and I don't think there was much in the way of documentation about, from a programmer's, you want to write a plugin, here's how you do it, standpoint, how you get that done. So that was kind of the point of the process, or the contest as well.
I I see that you're importing HTML parser. Is that just because the artifacts for Twitter and Facebook are going to show up in memory as raw HTML?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so HTML parser, you see LXML, HTML, basically anything I can use to get at, either wide swaths of stuff that might be HTML, and then kind of narrow it down to find bits of HTML, and then pull out classes and stuff like that. So yeah, there's just libraries that I'm used to using to do that kind of stuff, and some of them are better about dealing with stuff like you're going to find in memory, which is not properly structured HTML. It's got a bunch of crap at the end of it, and like LXML is really good at dealing with that kind of thing. And then some of them are just easier to use. So yeah, this is just a list of libraries I like to use when trying to do that kind of work.
Okay, cool. So last time we did this, the first thing was we looked at the imports, and then we went down to main because we figured out that we pretty much handle this the same way we approach reversing malware. But this is a plugin, so it doesn't really have a main, does it?
Yeah, no. From the place you end up starting is the render text in this. So I think you have a couple options, if I remember right, about rendering in different formats, rendering HTML, rendering CSV, and in my case, I just chose to do the bare basics and just say I'm going to render text as part of my output, and that's what most volatility plugins.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. What does the integration points look like? I mean, as far as volatility is concerned, what are the kind of functions that it can call, or I mean, what is
Yeah,
it?
that was the hardest thing, frankly, to figure out. What was available to me as okay. Now I'm a plugin. Great, awesome. What do I do? What do I have access to? What do I know at this point in time? What do I not have? And even basic stuff like if you see on line 58, where I'm just adding some command line options, took forever to figure out. Just kind of how do you do that? How do you add an option into volatility to say, hey, I'm a plugin, I exist, this is something I accept, and that's the structure for it for whatever that's worth. And I think the only way I figured that out was just copying and pasting, frankly, from some other plugin that happened to do a similar kind of thing. And in that case, what I'm doing there is just setting up maybe a shortcut to say, if you've got a list of processes in memory, I don't need to look through all of them. Twitter is going to exist in a browser. So give me the process ID of a browser, Chrome, Internet Explorer, Firefox, whatever, and let me go, just operate on that one particular process ID instead.
So you could actually add was PID a default? I mean, was it an option that existed on volatility itself, or are you providing new potential options?
New options. So it gives you kind of a dynamic way, depending on the plugins that you've got installed, to call a plugin. So if you run volatility against memory, you do volatility. Wherever the file name of the memory dump is that you have, -f file name of the memory, wherever that is, and then the very last thing is the plugin that you want to call. So like in this case, it would be Twitter, and then since I've done that, I can accept an option -p in this case for the process ID of the browser process that we want to target.
Okay, so the way that this gets called then is within volatility, so volatility pointed at the file, and then whatever plugin it is that I want to run, in this case the Twitter one, and then for each of those plugins then there'll be additional command line options which are specified here in the init. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what it looks like to me as well.
Okay. Oh, did we drop? We must have dropped Jeff for a minute.
Could be.
But that's what it looks like. It sounds like what he said, so I'm just going to assume that that's what we're going with. So, okay, so we create a class here, we give it some options, and then I presume when you call this, then it sounds like volatility itself is going to call whether it's render text or render XML or render other stuff in there. So somewhere in volatility, render text ends up being the method that gets called. And that's obviously where all the meat of the class is. So should we start looking at render text?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, let's do that.
What does calculate do? Just because it's
in this case, all I'm doing is saying of all the processes, like if you didn't give me a specific process ID, um, then what this is going to do is take a look at all the processes that are out there and try to find something that looks like a browser. Firefox, if you're just on like Linux, for example, it would just have Firefox. If you're on Windows, it would be Firefox.exe, Chrome or Chrome.exe, or that kind of thing.
Oh, so this is a good question too. Then, if I was using a Twitter client, would it still show up as HTML in memory?
That's a good question. I didn't look into that at this point in time. It was kind of all I could do to. My biggest challenge in this was trying to figure out how to deal with blocks of memory that you end up getting, especially in cases where tweets cross blocks of memory, and how to process through that in such a way that you could pull out full, tweets that may cross those sorts of boundaries. So I didn't get much time to do anything more than just say, okay, here's the major browsers. I'm going to deal with Twitter in a browser, but Twitter and the Twitter clients. That would be another interesting angle on this to say, is it exactly the same thing? Do they use the same classes? It's still HTML even, or is it, maybe it's easier in some cases.
Interesting.
Okay. So it starts off with it looks like we're setting up a bunch of regular expressions, and boy, they all just look great, don't they?
Yeah, they're awesome, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it looks like each of the regular expressions is pretty much looking for, some HTML content, whether it's the naming of a div or something like that. So we probably don't need to dive too deeply into each of those.
Yeah, in each case, what I'm trying to do there is, like, you see like a P and then 1 to 20 and then tweet dash text. So I'm just trying to give myself some leeway to say, I know tweet text falls after a paragraph header somewhere in the range of 1 to 20. After that, there may be junk in the middle classes or other classes like that. And then the thing that I'm interested in is just the stuff between there and the ending, P paragraph, ending paragraph point for that. So, and they all follow that same sort of thing where I give myself a range of characters, because if you just give yourself a beginning and an ending mark in memory, you're going to end up with all memory. And that doesn't work very well for trying to narrow down individual tweets or individual even parts of tweets in some of these cases. So in each one of these, the structure for those regex just follows basically the same thing, where it's the beginning of a tag, some number of characters, the main class or div marker, and then the end, and then use the grouping function within all that to try to figure out which specific part of that I'm getting, ignoring cases, trying to deal with Unicode, all that stuff along the way.
How awful was it to figure out what these needed to be?
Oh my God, it's terrible. Yeah, that was by far the largest part of the process.
So that was more work than writing the rest of the plugin, was just figuring out what the expressions needed to be? Because these look like there's effort made to get these right. I mean,
yeah.
This doesn't look like it comes for free.
No, yeah, and most of it was like, all right, fire up Internet Explorer, look at my Twitter stream, dump memory, I'll try to find a tweet I recognize, what does it look like, where is all the structures, and then do the same thing in Chrome, and then do the same thing in Firefox, and then do it on Linux, and what does that look like, and do that kind of trial and error function. And so a lot of time spent with strings, a lot of time just looking at large screens full of junk. And then dealing with Unicode is the next, biggest hassle in the entire mess.
On line 86 for proc in data gets passed in. So is data something that gets sent to the plugin from Volatility? And is data just, obviously it must be an array. Is it just the memory for each of the processes, or what is that?
Yeah. As far as I remember, it's just it is sent by Volatility. So it just, when Volatility wants to do something, it just calls that render text with an output file director as well. And so you just that's the structure that you have to deal with.
Okay, so it gives you the file descriptor for you to write into stuff, and then it gives you an array of data. Okay,
Right.
cool.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So that's helpful because I'm sure later on we'll see you writing to some file and I'm like, where'd you get the
Yeah.
file name for this? So that's cool.
Proc seems like an interesting object because it
It
has a
is.
lot of methods, it has a lot of different attributes. So I guess that's where all the fun goes. It should be. I mean, my understanding here, glancing at the code, is that it's a class that represents all the memory inside a specific process.
It does, yeah. And a lot of my time was spent kind of looking at that class and trying to figure out, because Volatility is one of those frameworks where it starts with kind of a base class and everything inherits, based on that base class.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're trying to figure something out, all you have is a function that has keyword args sent to it, and so you got to go figure out all the classes it inherited from, what the possible arguments were for that, and then go back, kind of to figure out where you're at in the class stream of everything to get there. But yeah, you'll see in just a little bit how we use that proc function to get the address space, get all the pages, and then start moving through the pages in memory, and then basically just start running those regexes. And it gets into just a pattern after that. So yeah, this first little block of lines up until about 124 or so is maybe the most interesting part, where we set up the pages and start to deal with them, and then after that is just running the regexes one after another.
So what was your reasoning for using temp file as opposed to something like string IO and doing it all in memory?
Yeah,
Hey
that's a good
Mike,
question.
is there a specific line that you're looking at right now? Just so I can.
98.
98. Okay.
Right. I think I remember I was trying different ways to get around having to deal with the Unicode, and I think part of my thought process at this point in time, being fairly new still to Unicode, was, well, maybe if I write it to a file, it'll get easier. So maybe a little superstition on my part of and not wanting to use a bunch of memory, I guess, as well in the process. So thinking it would be easier to just write all this out to a temporary file that may be able to make use of rather than doing the string IO trick to keep all that stuff out in memory. Because in some cases you end up with a lot. Like a browser process can expand to gigabytes of memory. So if you're on a analysis box trying to keep all that in memory and parse it all at the same point in time, it can get a little hairy. And part of this was I was trying to speed it up because I knew I was going to give a demo of this at some point in time. So I think this may have ended up being the faster way as well. So,
yeah, and that's a little bit surprising to me.
is it?
But it's no, I would. I mean, of course, it really depends how much memory you actually have in the machine, right? But if you're writing it to disk and reading it back, it could be a nightmare.
Yeah.
But I understand what you're doing here.
Yeah.
And it makes sense.
Mostly, I'm trying to get through it.
Yes, of course. And that's very honorable. That's very important. I have these moments all the time.
Yeah, right.
All the
it's like
time. I was having a moment like that just now at some code I was writing.
So if we were doing it, if we had infinite time, and we wanted to fix stuff on this, is this something that we would look at and say, hey, that'd be something that I wish we were just holding stuff in memory instead of writing to a temp file?
I would do some analysis and give it a shot and see what kind of speed and what kind of size you're looking at.
And how would you hold stuff in memory though? I mean, would you just like make a string basically and?
Well, string IO basically is just a memory map file handler.
Okay.
So you basically just write to what Python considers a file handle, but it's actually just stored in memory, and you can read and write and seek and everything.
That's actually very good.
Super
cool.
super useful.
Yeah, it is good. I've used it before in other cases, and I think it is the size of the actual data buffer that you end up with, because I'm crossing. Most of these plugins don't deal with that. They deal with a single page of memory at a time, and they don't deal with cross memory pages. And in my case, what I'm having to do is take every page essentially and write it all out to a file, and then start to read it back in and walk through the entire block of memory for the entire program. versus just a page of memory at a time. I couldn't actually. Now that I think about it, I couldn't find another plugin that did a similar thing. There's one that does do a strings sort of reference, but it's very limited. It doesn't look for large swaths of data like a direct message tweet, can end up being. I mean, it's thousands of characters.
So if you had a memory dump from a machine, like I have I'm going to brag here, I have a Mac Pro that has 64 gigs of memory. So if you had a memory dump from that thing, and we were using string I/O to try to assemble this it's likely then that you probably wouldn't have enough RAM to actually do this in memory.
It's possible. It depends on the browser that you use, and it depends on the what else is going on, how many tabs you got open, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay, yeah, because you're only grabbing browser processes. Okay, so my entire 64 gigs of RAM, I had to say it again, would probably not be being analyzed here then, because you're really only looking for...
I think you're going to be returning that soon, aren't you? You won't be able to brag anymore.
Oh, man, in fact, tomorrow I'm going to be wiping it, and I'm so sad about that, but...
I don't know, man. Maybe it could get lost in the mail or something, Just saying.
So I'll tell you one of my pet peeves, since one of the things that we wanted to talk about was programming practices. So on line 98, that sticks out for me is single letter variable names just cause me nothing but trouble. So that if it were anything, I might send a pull request to change that F into something else. And the reason is because later on I'll need to search for every place where that's being used, and I'm going to run into every for statement, every if statement. If I'm just searching for a single letter F. So there's my constructive feedback on something like this.
Well deserved. Yeah, well taken. That may be why I got third place.
Tell me about line 90. And so the way I'm interpreting it is self-config PID. In this case, self is referring to the Twitter class here. So if your own class does not equal none, and the string value of PID, which is passed in, no, it's not passed in. Where's that? Oh, if the string value of the process that you're looking at right now is not in this list here, then we can skip this. What?
This is reading from the init thing we did. So he adds this config option at line 60, and so if the user passed a comma separated list of PIDs, it's only these PIDs that he will write to this and consider.
Right. So if somehow you, as an analyst, have narrowed it down and said, I don't care about the Chrome, and so the guy had 3 browser processes running, I don't care about the Chrome one, I only want the Internet Explorer one, you could do that as part of this to say, hey, I only care about PID 1, 2, 3. And even though we find other browsers running on the box, we don't care about those necessarily. Like a terminal server, for example, maybe you got memory out of a terminal server.
Got it.
It had 30 users on it, and the only one you care about was the process ID for this one user.
Why are you checking the PID, though, of the Twitter class itself? Or am I misunderstanding the first if not self _ config.pid?
It's a good question. I'm having trouble seeing it because if I switch screens here, I think it cuts me off. Not so config page.
Yeah, so the default value for PID is none.
Oh, right. So if it's not set,
so if the user didn't set it, I would probably have rewritten this line to say if self._config.pid is not none.
Yeah, is not none would be better. Yeah.
Oh, I see where that's coming from. Okay, I'm sorry. So that's also part of the config.
The config that was set earlier.
Set on line, not 60. Okay.
60. Right. Yeah. So it's basically just trying to figure out, of all these processes that we got in the data, are we supposed to do something with this one or not? That's really
okay. So starting at 93, then we've looped through all the processes. We've skipped all the ones that were not one of our identified PIDs that we wanted to look for. So then after that, if we find one, we're going to say, hey, I found a browser PID. Yay! So that's cool. And now we can actually do stuff to it. So,
right.
Okay.
Right. Yep. And then, like you were saying, Alex, the interesting thing is the proc process gets you the ability to dig into the pages that are available in there. And so there's you can see two representations of that proc space,
yep.
And then the pages themselves. And so that's how you get access to the entire page list and maybe allocated to that specific process ID. Which is really neat. With two calls like that, you get all the memory associated with a particular process. So it's not much to do from a plugin standpoint. So then the issue is, all right, so now you have all these pages. How do you make sense of how a browser deals with pages and memory?
Yeah, but I think this was smart. Actually, the idea that it could cross the boundaries, so you actually need to glue them all together before you analyze them. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that took a long time to figure out. There was a lot of cases where I would dump memory from something, look at it, and then go, I know this tweet is there. How come I can't find it by just iterating the pages and looking? And then eventually, after a lot of trial and error, it's like, oh, because it crosses the boundary of this page. I'm not in that section anymore, so I got to come up with something else. As a matter of fact, Andrew Case, the guy who's one of the writers of Volatility, came to me afterwards and he was like, we looked at this section of code for a long time and tried to figure out why the hell you were doing this. And then we figured out, oh, you're looking for, in some cases, thousands and thousands of characters, and that's going to cross memory every time. So, yeah.
I was going to say something as well. I don't mean that as a discouragement, but this code probably doesn't work anymore because the way that the page has updated itself over time, right?
It's entirely possible, yeah. The downfall of this is the entire regex-based process, right? So if Twitter decides to change the class name for a tweet, it doesn't work anymore. And in fact, I was talking with somebody about what would be interesting would be to have an archive of of those kind of CSS structures over time. Because if you're dealing with a tweet from 2010, the CSS or a memory dump from 2010, like the CSS structure.
Wow, you're right.
Is entirely different than maybe it is a month later or 2 years later, or 2 years, or 2 years later in this case. So yeah, it's entirely possible that this may not work anymore.
So I wonder then, and this is me trying to figure out how to make code changes easier and stuff like that. I wonder if the Python-y way to do that would be to maybe take those regexes and actually stick them in a different class or something. A class of like Twitter regexes or something like that with a year or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know it's crappy because then like what if it changes mid-year or something like that. But the idea being that if I have a rough idea of when this memory dump was collected, then I could call my Twitter class with that particular year, and then would initialize the regexes with whatever they were for that time, and then the rest of the code and so that would at least make it easier. If Twitter did make some changes, we would just have to update that one class with some new regexes, and the rest of the code could stay intact.
Yeah, that would have definitely been that's definitely the right way of thinking. If you were totally all about, I want to be able to get any tweet from any point in time out of any bit of memory. As a matter of fact, you can get the date. There's another volatility plugin that will give you the date.
So you could even make a best guess. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So you could do that as well.
Yeah. And again, I would say that we're not here really to talk about how it should have been done as much as if we had infinite time and could make everything as beautiful as we wanted. What kind of stuff would we go after? So.
Yeah, no, that's fine. After 2 years, I have no more ownership here, so that's. I can barely remember what it does.
So it looks like at line 106 is where you're pretty much writing each of the pages into that one master collection of the memory for this.
Yeah, and doing my best to at least begin dealing with the Unicode problem, which you'll see, I think, represented throughout the rest of this thing. Because as you're dealing with memory, it's tough to tell whether it's actually a string, it's something that might be a string, it's something that you might Unicode decode to something that looks like it could be a possibly string. So yeah, essentially taking those blocks of memory and trying to pull out strings from it. Well, that's the problem that strings has, right? It's the same thing, but we're doing it across pages of memory.
It's interesting on line 105 you actually use the encoding variable, and then several places after that you just use the string ASCII, even though that's what encoding is for.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't think you use it ever again.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see the hurried nature of trying to get this done by the deadline. But my initial idea was to allow you to set that as an option, right? To say, oh, I think my memory dump is most likely to end up being an ASCII. And some of this, at this point in time, I had limited understanding of Unicode. I just knew that I hated it. I was trying everything I could to be able to get out of the Unicode jail and get some real work done.
Looking at line, oh, sorry, all right, go ahead.
Anyway, but that's why it's set as a variable above, was mostly so I could try different Unicode encodings, and then maybe give you the option to set one at runtime. It didn't turn out to be that valuable, so that's why you don't see the cleanup in there to go back and fix that.
So looking at line 110 through 112, it looks like we go and in that temp file we go back to the beginning, then we read the whole thing into memory and close it out. So now kind of going back to the discussion that we had earlier about string I/O and how we might not be able to use that if there was really huge things in memory or something like that, and that's why it makes sense to go with temp file. Now it looks like we are back to where maybe we should have used string I/O because we end up putting it all into memory anyways.
Not necessarily, because if you have string I/O in memory, it could be 3-4 gigs in size, then you're going to read it out to a variable that's also going to be 3 or 4 gigs in size. You're actually doubling the amount of memory it takes.
So it could be, so not only, okay. Wait, can you say that again?
No,
so string I/O being a memory map file handler is going to be stored in memory. Then when you go to read it to a variable, you're going to be duplicating the data into a variable. So now you're going to have 2 instances in memory until you close out that file handle and clear it.
But if you had used string I/O to put all to join all this stuff up in the first place, you wouldn't then read your string I/O file into another variable, would you? You would.
In order to do, so the same reason that you have to do .read on a file handle that you read off disk is the same reason you have to do it with string I/O off memory. It's basically treating memory like a file system.
I see. So then we're now I'm flipping again and saying, okay, so maybe sticking it onto the file system makes sense, because if we have large objects, we certainly don't want to have 2 copies of that sitting in memory.
Yeah, and it's temporary until like line 112 when you close out, but still, for that period of time, you are duplicating.
Yeah, which could be problematic if you have a large process and you're trying to analyze this on your netbook.
There's probably a way for you to incrementally add to a variable that you're building, right? I mean, it's a small nightmare for memory management, but that's what interpreted languages are for, right?
Yeah, you can feel my pain here, right? It's like, this is what I went through. It's like, how do I find the right way to deal with blocks?
Yeah, and I would have done the same thing you did. I was like, oh, fuck it.
Oh yeah. Especially when you're under a time constraint. But
this
would be really interesting. I'd love to kind of find out what is the right way to handle this, because and not to say that this isn't. Maybe this is the right way, but I'd be really curious. This is definitely falling into the, man, I wonder if there's a better way, but I don't know what that better way would be right now.
Yeah, what I would probably have tried to do before the file would be trying to increment, trying to concatenate like a string variable in memory.
Yeah, that's probably what I would have maybe tried, and I don't know if that would work or not, but that's
Yeah, me neither.
probably would have been something I would have definitely tried.
Yeah, the problem you always end up in that is that if you truncate that at some point in time, you may have missed the beginning or the end or the middle of some structure that was valuable to you. And it seemed like no matter what I tried, because I remember going through those kind of iterations and saying, all right, well, I'm going to try to conserve memory. I'm going to try to, and I would always miss something that I knew was there. And I had like a string dump of memory. And I'm like, I'm trying to find this. Like the first thing in here is a cookie for user ID, right? Meaning this is the guy who had this Twitter account. It's the ID of the person, right? And it gives you, you can reference that as the guy behind the keyboard kind of thing, which is always valuable in forensics. So, any opportunity you have to get that is worth it versus, managing memory down to the kilobyte or whatever. So, yeah, I remember going through that, and almost everything I tried, I remember running into that issue where it's like, oh, I missed this. I had my hit list of things I wanted to get out of my memory dump, stuff like cookies and try to find user ID and as many direct messages as I could find and that kind of stuff. And every avenue I took gave me a different set of those. And that was kind of the maddening part of the whole thing. It was like, what's the one that's going to give me all of them? That's the one I want. It's like, well, this one's the one that gave me everything.
Mo's cookie UI Dre dot find iter. Is
that the find iter? Great name, Bo. Great name.
Is that supplied by one of the volatility things that we imported at the beginning?
So the find iter thing is just taking a regular expression and iterating every instance of it that you find in there. So that's all that's doing.
Oh, it creates an iterator. I got it.
Yeah, it creates an iterator. Yeah. So that re is just a variable that's set above there, just a regular expression to look for a particular Twitter cookie ID.
Interesting, and that's pretty much the structure you're using it here for all.
Yeah, that's the structure for everything else. Is that find the basic structure of something, and then dig into that and try to find things like the number of tweets, the number of followers, number of followings, like in the next section on there, or the particular Twitter ID or that kind of thing. So yeah, trying to follow the same sort of structure. So the rest of this gets a little boring after a while. It's all just processing XML and stuff.
Yeah. No, I don't mean to say it does get boring after that. But I see.
That's some exciting code, dude.
No, actually, this is actually really exciting though, because when I find out that I've got blocks of code that are basically doing the same thing, the first thing that goes through my head is like, sweet, the next 100 lines of code I'm probably going to understand.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Once I've got the idea of what you're doing there, and so it looks like for each of these, in a nutshell, yeah, you're looking through memory, matching against your I see. So Mo's cookie UI Dre, that's one of the regular expressions that you established up front. That's not a class that's being called. Okay, got it.
No, right. It's just a weird variable name, the way I variables, then re being the regular expression stuff. So yeah, it's just a regular expression. We're just looking for a match on there. If we find one, then we try to pull out stuff on there. And in every case I could find, I tried to set default values because there's always something missing in memory. Every time you find something that looks valid, there's always going to be a version of that where it's missing just because pages are duplicated and they're swapped out and pulled back in. And you can't tell what the browser was trying to do.
It looks like you're making some effort in each of these blocks to only report on unique things, which is kind of cool because in the tweets section here, it looks like you're actually calculating the hash of the tweet, and that's what you're using then as the uniqueness of it. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because, like I said, memory gets duplicated a lot of different times. Especially, it varies depending on the browser. So you can find a particular tweet repeated, 1,000 times or something. And it's like I don't want to see it 1,000 times. I only need one, and I need the best one. But I need the one that has the most artifacts associated with it. So that's really the challenge of all these sections is saying, have I seen this before? I don't need to report it again. But if it's a better version of something I've seen before, maybe I want to grab that artifact rather than the previous one because it has more metadata associated with it, or that kind of thing.
Now, are you actually doing that, like saying, okay, I found something before, but now I'm going to replace it with this better one? Because that seems like that would be hard.
Yeah, it does seem hard now that I say it. Meaning I'm probably not doing it, but now it seems like a good idea, something I should have done.
See, and I guess I would almost disagree, but I'm not sure if I. Well, no, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't disagree. It sounds great if you can pull it off.
Yeah.
But it sounds hard, I guess.
Yeah.
But
I guess the thing to do.
Because I was looking at this and I was thinking, okay, memory is copied in multiple places, as you mentioned, and so if you see the same tweet and we assume that the tweet is intact, then yeah, it's going to come out with the same hash and not get repeated. Where I think that what you've done here actually gets to be really useful, though, is that if you have a section of memory and part of the tweet is overwritten by some other crap in memory, and then later on, so I only get the beginning of it or something, but then later on, since it's duplicated in full, I get the whole thing, and okay, fine, whatever. So I got to read an extra half a tweet or something that got repeated later. That doesn't seem like a bad thing at all, and might actually even be useful information, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what would happen. To be honest with you, in this case, is that it would just report both of them. It would just have one that has maybe some missing, unknown
Right.
defaults, and then it would report the next one with those gaps filled in.
I think trying to make it so that it could figure out that the tweet I'm looking at now is similar to but better than a previous one. I think when you look at the effort to reward ratio for that,
Yeah.
I would say F it and just leave it as is.
Yeah. Yeah. And thankfully, that's what I do. So here you go.
Yeah. I'm not
So
sure
direct
how we
messages
solve that.
were interesting. They were actually kind of difficult to find in there for some reason. But I do remember having a lot of trouble finding them because they're really large in terms of the wrappers that are the divs and all that. I mean, part of it's figuring out all the spans and divs and all that stuff that surrounds the CSS for one of those items. And as you know, I mean, the guys at Twitter are the guys behind Bootstrap, right? So they're CSS geniuses, and there's just wrappers and wrappers and wrappers and wrappers and wrappers of CSS around 140 characters. So 140 characters really quickly turns into 4,000 characters, and trying to find a way to get into that and pick out only the interesting bits. I remember it being really challenging, especially for some reason in the direct messaging portion of that.
And everybody knows that that decoding CSS is just so easy and fun.
Yeah, it's no problem, right? Yeah, that's why, as you saw in the imports, I'm getting every library I can possibly think of that can survive, the rash of Unicode and missing things and all that. So I can just say, hey, please, for God's sakes, go find something and tell me what it is.
Yeah, this is interesting because it looks like for tweets, for example, you're pretty much just going through the browser data. Oh no, you are actually looking at XML for that as well, huh? Or no,
Yeah,
LXML, HTML,
LXML.
string. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah.
Yeah, and all of it's just find a particular class, and then try to deal with Unicode and pull out stuff based on that class.
Unicode.
And then we get to the end of the code. So I have. So speaking of Unicode, I must have read that that page. There's a page out there of what every developer absolutely should know about Unicode at a minimum or something like that. And I've read that like 60 times, and I still have to say I just am I fear Unicode. Honestly, it is one of my code fears.
Yeah.
Do any of you guys get are you guys all thinking to yourselves right now, shit, Kevin, that's pretty basic stuff, man. I didn't have that.
Not at all. Not at all.
I'm glad I'm not alone.
I reread that, and I reread this bit of code every now and again, even to remember how did I deal with it? I remember I dealt with it. How did I figure it out? Did I just managed to make it through somehow? But yeah, the encode ASCII ignore, that's the bread and butter of this code. You'll see it in there again and again and again and again. And that's the way I made it through dealing with Unicode. So,
don't write it in Python 3.
yeah, right. Yeah.
Now, I thought that Python 3 basically handles Unicode real nicely and makes all my
It
problems go away.
it only handles Unicode.
So is that bad? Like, why would moving this to Python 3 be bad?
If you don't like Unicode.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone likes
But
Unicode.
I think the reason that I don't like Unicode is because it's not easy. And I guess I got the impression that Python 3 was going to make Unicode easy for me. Am I wrong about that?
The reason Unicode sucks is because it's not well handled by everything else, if that makes sense.
Right, okay.
So, like, ASCII is easy. Everything's been rendering ASCII for ages. So you have a browser, you have a terminal, anything, and it'll render ASCII no problem. But the second you throw in Unicode, well, if I'm in PuTTY, is it going to handle Unicode properly? Do I have to set any specific flags for certain characters and what Unicode character is supposed to render as, what language is it in, all that crap is really what makes it difficult. In Python, they actually have a base string object. The reason that they added it, I believe, is to get around instances where you have a string object that is not an ASCII string but is a Unicode string. And it'll still detect it as a string. So I use that fairly regularly. I use isInstance base string on most things that I have to check to see if I'm getting some type of string variable out of.
Python lords are going to be mad at you for using isInstance, though. So.
Yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, for me, at least at this point in time, Unicode was the CSS of Python. Where you just sort of keep hacking at it until you hope that it does the right thing, and then when it does the right thing, you're done.
I love CSS for that reason.
Yeah, and you don't care why it works. After all that frustration, you're just
that's a very accurate description of CSS.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to claim that I'm more advanced, but maybe I'm not. Maybe I haven't had to deal with it.
See, it's funny because this is the kind of stuff that actually makes me feel like I'm not more advanced. Because I will regularly say, for example, a crappy programmer, and people like Kyle Maxwell will say to me, well, why do you think you're a crappy programmer? I'm like, well, I really struggle with CSS, and I really struggle with Unicode and stuff like that. And then I hear other people struggle with that too, and it makes me feel just a little bit better about myself.
Apropos to Scott's blog post today, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. His blog post about like the different types of imposter syndrome and stuff, and I, in particular, really identify with number 3 on the list, where he was talking about how you're a generalist across a variety of skills. So maybe I'm only a 3 to a 5 in each of those areas. So then I start to feel bad because I'm not a 7 or an 8 at anything.
Yeah. Well, you got Thought Leader going for you.
Yeah, I do. Right? I do have Thought Leader, so that's good for now. Now, on Monday when I start my new job, I don't know what I'm going to be. I've picked out a job title that I'm hoping they'll let me use, though. So.
Yeah.
Which one is it? Can you divulge ahead of time?
It actually got posted in our room. This was a real job title. Booz Allen Hamilton had a job opening for
the next gen
cyber fusion analyst, and I'm gunning hard that I want that to be my title. Because what the hell does it even mean? I really want one of those job titles that when I tell my dad, like, what the hell does that actually mean? So. Yeah, next-gen cyber fusion analyst is what I'm hoping. Fingers crossed.
You should put a dot in code ASCII ignore at the end of
that. So we've pretty much gone through this code. Is there anything that we want to, anything in particular that we want to go back and look at or ask questions about, or are we? I think that we, I think I, anyways, would have had trouble getting through this code without you being here, Jeff, to tell me about the specific struggles that you were trying to overcome in this.
Yeah.
I think a lot of that has to do with volatility, because like you had mentioned, it is difficult at best to find good documentation that tells you why a plugin is doing something and what it's for in order to know what you're supposed to be doing in it.
Yeah.
So to see what you're doing is like, well, why did he do it? And your short answer is basically, I copy pasted from an existing plugin and it seemed to be working for them, so it works for me. Which is basically how everyone writes JavaScript, which is, fine by me. But it still lends to the fact that without those other plugins around, I wonder how much more difficult it would have been to get this going.
Yeah, it would have been possible if I didn't have something to look at to reference, especially the strings. There's a strings plugin that I remember looking at like forever, hours and hours and hours, trying to figure out what it's doing and why it's doing it, and I couldn't even find references of people using it. But I knew that it was doing the same sort of thing. It was taking processes, dealing with blocks of memory, pulling things out of them, and I knew that was my task, and so that was my starting point. But yeah, that was definitely one of the most difficult parts, was taking this giant framework of classes that, like I said, is like a base class, and then everything's inherited from that base class, and like decomposing all that to figure out, oh, you start in the middle. That's where you're at. That's very, very difficult.
Cool.
Yeah, I did link at the comment section to a kind of oh, this is the interface. These are the kind of stuff that you should create to create a volatility plugin. And it's funny that I haven't really digged through all of it, but something that I would expect to be there that I think would be useful is specifically that architecture, right? So these are the things that you as a plugin object will receive as your functions. So this is this class, it has this methods, it has this attributes and things like that, right? It's all about objects talking to each other. So you really need to get familiarized with whatever the way it was architected, so that you can even start talking with it, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's a great platform, but yeah, very, very complex. Because I mean, they're focused on like reversing windows, right? that's the so yeah.
Doesn't get more complicated than that.
No, it doesn't. So I can totally understand why they're like a little lax on the documentation of, you're a plugin and here's what you're going to get. It's like, hey, we figured out Windows.
Alex, you're having too much fun with the title thing now that you can put under your name.
Did you like it? Oh God, I think I'm
nice.
gonna change it like every 5 minutes now.
I have 4 or 5 of them myself for that very reason. Here, I'll switch mine to another one that I often like to use. It's just aw yeah. Hey, we've been talking for about an hour here. We've gone through this entire program, which is great. Thank you, Jeff, for you volunteering it for us to look
Sacrificing.
at. Yeah, and thanks for walking us through it. Obviously, we need more ideas for look at, but I felt like this was educational for me, so I appreciate your time.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, guys.
I'm not afraid to write volatility plugins anymore.
I am.
Yeah, I'm not going to agree with you on that one, Alex. I'm
not sure if I ever will, but I'm not afraid anymore. It doesn't mean that it's something that's going to happen.
All right, I'm going to call it.
Cool.
Okay.